The storm didn't just bring rain, it brought reckoning. I stood on my front porch, coffee in hand, watching as Karen Mitchell, the HOA president and self-appointed goddess of lawn perfection, screamed into her phone while ankle-deep in muddy water. Behind her, the shattered remains of her prized koi pond bubbled like a witch's cauldron. Overhead, a massive limb from the old oak tree in my yard stretched across her property line, its bark soaked and glistening, resting like the judgment of nature itself on her perfectly manicured hydrangeas. "You'll be liable for this!" she shrieked at me over the roar of thunder, her hair plastered to her cheeks, mascara streaking like war paint. "That tree is a menace!" I just sipped my coffee, eyes steady. The tree had been there long before either of us. It had seen world wars, heatwaves, and hurricanes. It had watched me grow up, bury pets, celebrate birthdays under its shade. That tree wasn't a menace, it was home. But Karen never saw it that way. 3 months ago, she started demanding I cut it down. Claimed it was dangerous. Claimed it dropped too many leaves. Claimed it didn't match the aesthetics of the community. Now here we were. A storm had come. The tree hadn't fallen, but it had leaned, shifted just enough to let Karen know it was still standing. And it had chosen where to place its message. If you're wondering how we got here, how a neighborhood feud turned into a war of roots and rain, you're not alone. Because I never meant to fight. But when Karen tried to kill my tree, that's when I realized nature doesn't need revenge. It just waits. And when the time is right, it speaks. Loud. That oak wasn't just a tree. It was the tree. Planted by my grandfather in 1943 when he returned from the war, it stood in the center of our yard like a monument, thick-limbed, sprawling, roots like coiled muscle pushing up through the lawn. The neighborhood changed, the houses got bigger, fences got wider, but the tree never moved. As a kid, I built my first treehouse in its arms with scrap wood and bent nails. When I was 13, I carved my initials into the trunk, right next to my father's, who had done the same decades earlier. On hot summer days, it gave me shade. On cold winter nights, I'd lie in bed and listen to the wind whip through its branches like whispers from generations past. Every birthday, every 4th of July, every breakup, every late-night beer with friends, it had seen it all. When my parents passed, I inherited the house. I kept the gutters clean, patched the roof, added a coat of paint where needed, but I never touched that tree. It had outlived 2 wars, 4 hurricanes, and 3 generations of our family. It would outlive me too, I always figured. Then came Karen. The day she showed up, clipboard in hand, I knew trouble had crossed the property line. She had that HOA look, fitness gear that had never seen a treadmill, sunglasses too big for her face, and a smile so tight it felt vacuum-sealed. "Hi. I'm Karen Mitchell, president of the Evergreen Bluffs HOA. Just doing our quarterly walkthroughs. Mind if I step in for a moment?" Without waiting for a response, she was already eyeing the oak like it had personally insulted her begonias. "We have some concerns," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "About this." I followed her gaze to the tree. "Your tree is, well, quite large. And it drops a significant amount of leaves into neighboring yards. We've had complaints." I blinked. "Complaints? It's a tree, Karen." She gave me a tight smile. "It also overhangs community sidewalks. That could be a liability issue. And the roots, there's potential for foundation disruption. Not to mention it's not exactly aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood design palette." Design palette. Like we were living in a brochure. I told her the tree was perfectly healthy, had been recently inspected, in fact. No disease, no structural weakness. A local arborist even filed a conservation recommendation. Karen didn't care. Karen had rules. And the rules said any structure, yes, she used the word structure, that extended beyond your lot line or posed potential community risk could be subject to mandatory removal. She handed me a citation form with my name already filled in and a line that read, "Non-compliant vegetation, removal recommended." I didn't sign it. I told her what the arborist said. I offered to trim back the outer branches, even rake more regularly during fall. But none of that mattered. "This tree doesn't fit the vision," she said, glancing down her clipboard like it was scripture. I remember looking at her, really looking, and realizing she didn't see a tree. She saw a problem. An inconvenience. Something she couldn't control. And people like Karen? They don't just want rules. They want everything neat, small, and silent. But this tree, it was none of those things. It was wild. It was rooted. And it wasn't going anywhere without a fight. The first letter came folded neatly in an HOA envelope, tucked under my doormat like a snake in the grass. "Notice of noncompliance," it read in bold red letters. "Subject: unauthorized hazardous vegetation." It accused me of everything from excessive leaf debris to potential root encroachment onto community easements. At the bottom was a deadline: 30 days to submit a removal plan, or face escalating daily fines. I laughed at first. Actually laughed out loud. Then I read the second page. The fines started at $250 per day. I didn't waste time. I called the arborist again, Steve, a guy with 20 years in the business, and a beard that made him look like a tree himself. He walked the property, inspected every inch of the oak, and provided a new, signed report. "No signs of disease, rot, or instability. Root system stable and self-contained. Tree poses no threat to structures, walkways, or utilities. Oak is considered ecologically valuable and qualifies for conservation under county guidelines." I attached his report to my formal response, citing county tree protection ordinances, and even scanned a copy of the letter my grandfather received in 1981 from the State Heritage Tree Program, acknowledging the oak as a community legacy specimen. I thought that would shut them up. It didn't. A week later, I received another notice, this time marked "Final Warning," declaring that my documentation had been reviewed but did not satisfy the board's determination of community safety standards. In plain English? They didn't care. They wanted the tree gone. Karen showed up the next day, standing on the sidewalk like she owned the soil beneath my lawn. "This isn't personal," she said, arms folded. "We're simply following procedure." I didn't respond. Just handed her a copy of the county's conservation statute and pointed to the paragraph that read, "No HOA regulation shall override recognized protections for designated heritage trees." She read it, blinked, smiled tightly. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Well, statutes are open to interpretation, especially when safety is concerned." That's when I knew. This wasn't about safety. This wasn't even about the tree. This was about control. Karen had drawn her line in the mulch, and she expected me to cave. But what she didn't understand, what she never could understand, was that you don't intimidate something with roots this deep. The tree wasn't just part of my property. It was part of me. So if Karen wanted a war over an oak, she just planted the first seed. Would you have fought to save the tree, or just cut it down to avoid trouble? Comment 1, if you would have defended it. Comment 2, if you'd rather remove it and stay out of HOA drama. It started with the leaves. Just a few at first, curling at the edges, browning far too early for spring. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a cold snap, or a dry week. But by the third morning, the front yard looked like October had crash-landed in May. Leaves blanketed the grass. Branches drooped low like they were carrying bad news. And then I saw it. The south-facing roots, thick, gnarled things that had always been strong enough to break stone, were starting to shrivel. The bark peeled in spots. And there, nestled in the exposed soil near the base of the trunk, was a strange, pale residue. Almost chalky. Like someone had spilled ash into the earth. I knelt down and touched it. The smell hit me immediately, sharp, synthetic, wrong. I called Steve the arborist again. He showed up the next afternoon, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his canvas jacket, his face unreadable as he examined the roots. He scraped samples, sniffed the soil, took a few photos, then stood in silence for a long time, arms crossed. Finally, he looked at me. This didn't happen on its own. What do you mean? I mean someone did this, he said, gesturing to the residue. You're dealing with a heavy-grade herbicide, probably triclopyr or imazapyr. Stuff like this doesn't just show up. He went quiet for a moment, then added, it's used to kill stumps. Industrial-level root rotters. If someone wanted to take out a big tree without a chainsaw, this is how they do it. I felt my stomach drop. You're saying someone poisoned it? He didn't answer. Just handed me a small plastic bag of soil and said, get this tested. University lab if you can. Don't wait. I didn't need the test to know. I already knew. Karen. She couldn't win through fines or citations. So she tried something quieter. Dirtier. A war of attrition, fought underground where no one could see the damage until it was too late. But she underestimated the tree. And she underestimated me. That night, I stood by the oak in the dark, hand resting on the bark that once held my childhood treehouse. I could feel the faint tremble beneath the surface, the slow, dying pulse of something ancient fighting for breath. I looked across the street. Karen's porch light was on. Her blinds half closed. Her car still warm in the driveway. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I had a feeling. The kind that grows in your gut like a storm cloud, low and heavy. I knew one thing, if she had the nerve to poison my tree, she wasn't going to stop there. So I started documenting everything. Every new leaf that fell. Every branch that dropped without wind. Every inch of bark that turned gray. I photographed the residue. I mapped the root spread. I installed a discreet trail cam angled toward the side of the yard, just in case someone decided to pay a visit while I slept. And I waited. Not for revenge. Not yet. Just for the truth to rise, like sap from deep inside the trunk. Because trees don't die quietly. And when they fall, they take secrets down with them. Within 2 weeks, the tree looked sick. The upper branches turned brittle, leaves yellowing even as the spring sun warmed the yard. Neighbors began to notice. A few even asked if I'd considered removing it before it falls on someone. Karen didn't ask. She just smiled. A small, satisfied smile that bloomed every time she passed my yard during her daily HOA inspections, clipboard in hand like a scepter. She didn't say anything directly, but her eyes did. And her walk? A little slower now, like she was savoring the victory she thought she'd earned. I let her. I raked the leaves, trimmed the browning branches, even posted a notice on the neighborhood board saying I was consulting options. I played the part, resigned, tired, broken. But behind the curtains? I was just getting started. The trail cam had already paid off. One blurry shot at 2:17 a.m. showed a figure crouching near the base of the tree, hooded, flashlight angled down. No clear face, but the SUV parked across the street looked awfully familiar. A white Lexus with a dented rear fender. Karen's. I upgraded the camera the next day. Bought a thermal lens, night vision, cloud backup. Then I installed a second one inside a fake birdhouse in the tree itself, just in case she came back. Meanwhile, I collected soil samples, carefully labeled, stored in airtight containers. I sent them to 2 different university labs under false names, just to avoid interference. I logged every interaction with Karen, every HOA notice, every sideways comment at the mailbox. I even started attending the HOA meetings. Sat in the back, took notes. Listened to Karen float ideas like neighborhood uniformity improvements and vegetation modernization initiatives. Code for kill what you can't control. I said nothing. Asked no questions. Just smiled and nodded. Because the deeper the roots of her arrogance grew, the higher her fall would be. I started tracing HOA spending too. Public records request. Got copies of landscaping contracts, board votes, expense authorizations. Found a curious $2,300 line item listed as Vegetation Hazard Mitigation, Emergency Response. Dated exactly 1 day after my tree's first signs of sickness. Interesting. But I didn't accuse her. I didn't storm into the meetings. I didn't post in the Facebook group or rally the neighbors. No. I let her think she won. Because people like Karen? They don't collapse under pressure. They collapse under confidence. And she was just about to get comfortable enough to step right into the trap I was quietly building beneath her polished brick steps. One fine root at a time. By the time the first summer storm rolled in, the tree looked like a ghost of itself. Its branches were thin, stripped of strength. The bark had darkened, flaked in patches. Most people walking by just saw a dying oak, a reminder that nothing lasts forever. But I saw something else. I saw the ground shifting. The soil near the base, normally solid, packed with roots, had grown soft, uneven. Subtle dips appeared where the tree's root system once anchored the land. I knew what it meant. The roots were rotting underground. Not all of them, but enough to matter. And the worst of it? The soft spots weren't just in my yard. They were spreading. Karen's property sat slightly downhill from mine, and by the second week of storms, I noticed standing water along the edge of her front walkway. Her prized lawn, once sharp as astroturf, had turned spongy. One of her decorative concrete pavers tilted sideways like a sinking ship. Then came the cracks. Hairline at first, along the corners of her foundation near the garage. You'd miss them if you weren't looking. But I was. And so was my camera. Every shift in soil, every puddle that refused to drain, every tilt in her perfect flower beds, I documented it all. Time-stamped. Labeled. Karen, of course, saw things differently. She came storming onto my porch one afternoon after a particularly heavy downpour, HOA citation in hand like a dagger. This, she snapped, slapping the paper against my storm door, is for the continued failure to remove hazardous vegetation. Your tree is compromising the drainage and destabilizing the soil around adjacent properties, including mine. I glanced at the citation. Another $500 fine. Plus a threat of legal escalation. You're blaming the tree? I asked deadpan. It's the root structure. She hissed. It's interfering with groundwater flow. Creating erosion pathways. I wanted to laugh. Creating erosion pathways? She'd clearly Googled that. Instead, I simply replied, "Didn't you say last month that the tree had no roots left?" She blinked. The pause was everything. Then came the fake smile. I meant the upper roots. Obviously, the deep system is still active. Aggressively so. Right. Aggressively so. Was Karen in the wrong, or just following the rules? Comment, yes. If she crossed the line. Comment, no. If she was just doing her job. She didn't realize she was describing the exact thing that would prove her wrong, because the tree wasn't aggressively rooting anymore. It was collapsing. And the reason her land was failing wasn't because of the tree's strength, but because she had weakened it. I took the citation and thanked her, folding it gently and slipping it into my growing evidence binder. Let her stack her paperwork. Let her build her case on half-truths and crumbling ground. Because every time it rained now, nature was reminding her. She hadn't killed the tree. She had only made it angry. And it was starting to speak. Not through branches. But through the earth. It happened during the third storm in 5 days. The rain came sideways, hammering the windows with the fury of 1,000 tiny fists. Gutters overflowed within minutes. Street drains gurgled and spat brown water back into the yards like they were drowning in their own regret. I was on my porch, same chair, same thermos, when I saw it. A low rumble echoed from beneath the sodden ground, followed by a sharp, wet pop. Then, earth shifted. A thick section of soil along the edge of my yard collapsed inward, and with it came the tangled remains of a massive root, gray, twisted, but very much alive. It wasn't growing. It was rising. The root had been forced upward by pressure below, by the rainwater that could no longer escape. And the place it emerged from? Right above the old HOA utility easement. I walked out into the storm, boots sinking into mud, flashlights slicing through the sheets of water. What I found made my breath catch. The exposed root had cracked through a section of buried plastic drainage pipe, the main runoff channel the HOA had installed last year to modernize the neighborhood's water system. I could see the shattered pipe, its jagged edges jutting out like broken bones, water gushing upward in a useless spray. The tree wasn't the problem. The pipe was. And the pipe had been laid directly across the root zone, illegally, without any soil study, without notifying the county, and most importantly, without my consent. By morning, Karen's yard looked like a war zone. Water had surged back toward her foundation overnight, seeping into the lower brick. Green mold bloomed along the base of her garage. One neighbor swore they saw water pouring out from under her front door at 2 a.m. Another said they heard her screaming. By noon, contractors were parked outside her house, tearing out drywall and hauling soaked carpet into the street. Karen didn't look so smug that day. She didn't even look angry. She looked scared. I waited until the storm passed, then opened my laptop. Inside a folder labeled Roots, I compiled every photo, every soil test, every timestamped trail cam image, every HOA letter, and, most importantly, the drone footage I'd captured 2 months ago, showing the illegal trenching of HOA contractors across my easement line. Then I wrote 2 emails. One to the County Environmental Compliance Division. The other to the Office of Urban Watershed Protection. Subject line: Suspected HOA violation, unauthorized infrastructure over protected root system. I hit send. Then I sat back, poured another cup of coffee, and watched as a single brown leaf spiraled down from the oak and landed on my railing. The tree wasn't dead. It was just waiting. And now? So was I. They came 3 days later. 2 city trucks, white with faded blue seals, pulled up to the curb just after 9 a.m. A third vehicle, unmarked but clearly official, parked right behind them. 3 men and 1 woman stepped out, clipboards in hand, steel-toed boots splashing into puddles as they fanned out across the street. They didn't knock. They went straight to the easement. I watched from my porch as they followed the exposed root system and flagged off the area with bright orange tape. One knelt beside the broken drainage pipe, gently sifting through the muddy soil. Another scanned through paperwork and snapped photos on a tablet. I could hear snippets of conversation over the hum of idling engines. No permit filed. Clearly crosses private boundary. Violation of Municipal Code 17.14. Yeah, that's a heritage-protected root zone. It's right here on the plat map. One of the officials walked up my driveway a few minutes later, calm but professional. Mr. Taylor? I nodded. We received your submission. Thank you for your documentation, it was very thorough. He tapped his clipboard. We've confirmed your property contains a protected legacy tree under both county and state conservation statutes. Additionally, the drainage system installed by your HOA was laid without permit and violates multiple underground utility and environmental impact codes. I didn't say much. Just nodded, as if I hadn't already printed those exact regulations 3 months ago and highlighted every single violation in yellow. Across the street, Karen stepped outside in a pristine windbreaker like she was ready to negotiate. The inspector didn't even look at her. Next step, he said, will be a formal notice of violation served to the HOA board. There may also be civil penalties. Possibly criminal if intent can be proven. He paused, then added, we'll need copies of all your original documents. I smiled. They're ready. Because while Karen had spent months trying to bury that tree, I'd been planting something else. A paper trail. And now? It was starting to grow. The first lawsuit came 2 weeks after the inspection. A family on the corner filed for damages, foundation cracks, mold intrusion, and black water flooding traced directly to the failed drainage line. Then another family joined. And another. Before long, a class action suit was forming against the Evergreen Bluffs HOA and, more pointedly, against individual board members for gross negligence. Karen's name was at the top. Meanwhile, the city posted a cease and desist notice on the HOA's community center, barring them from further infrastructure work until permits could be reviewed and violations addressed. The fines alone were already pushing six figures. Then came the insurance companies. Karen, in a panic, tried to file claims for the water damage to her home, walls blooming with mold, front steps separating from the foundation. But the adjuster barely spent 15 minutes on site before delivering the verdict. Claim denied. Damage resulted from unpermitted alterations. Act of negligence. Without insurance coverage, she was stuck. The rumors spread fast. Karen had personally approved the trenching project without a vote from the full board. She'd bypassed city review. And when news of the poisoned soil surfaced, thanks to a leaked university lab report she didn't realize I had forwarded anonymously, things turned criminal. The county's environmental division launched a formal investigation into ecological sabotage, naming her as a person of interest in the intentional destruction of a protected heritage tree. The fine alone could reach $50,000, with potential jail time if intent was proven. Karen stopped showing up to HOA meetings. The final one, held in a borrowed church basement, lasted less than 10 minutes. Only 12 people showed. A motion to dissolve the HOA entirely passed without a single dissenting vote. Karen wasn't there. She was already gone. Her once pristine home sat dark, foreclosure notices taped to the window. A rusted U-Haul had been spotted in her driveway days earlier. By the time the city came to serve final papers, she'd vanished. No apology. No explanation. No power left. The HOA she ruled like a queen? Reduced to dust and silence. Just like the concrete she tried to bury my tree with. The arborist came back in early fall. He knelt by the oak, ran his hand along the bark, and smiled. "Still alive," he said softly. "Barely. But it held on." Turns out, the older, deeper roots, untouched by the poison, had carried enough strength to keep the tree grounded. The surrounding soil, once choked with chemicals, had started to heal. Worms returned. Birds nested again. And for the first time in years, the oaks sprouted new green. The neighbors, once wary and silent, began to stop by. Some brought mulch, others planted native flowers around the base. A retired couple offered to rebuild the old bench that had rotted away beside it. No one talked about Karen. No one needed to. The tree said enough. One crisp morning, I took a scrap piece of cedar from my shed and carved a small wooden sign. The letters weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. I hammered it into the ground just in front of the roots, where anyone walking by would see it. Let nature speak for itself. And it had. Through roots, through rain, through rot and ruin. It had spoken. And now? It stood. Still. If you felt even a little satisfaction when the tree survived and the HOA collapsed, hit like and subscribe. There's more HOA karma where that came from. In the end, it wasn't about the fines, the lawsuits, or even the HOA's downfall. It was about patience. About roots. This story reminds us that real strength doesn't come from being loud or forceful. It comes from knowing when to stand firm, and when to let time do the talking. Like the oak, we all carry histories, quiet strength, and deep foundations that others might not see. And sometimes, when we're attacked, the best response isn't rage, but resilience. It also reminds us that nature is not something to dominate or tame. It's something to live with, respectfully, humbly. When we disrupt what has always been in place simply to serve power or vanity, the consequences don't arrive with sirens, they rise slowly, like water through soil. And perhaps most importantly, justice doesn't always come on our schedule. But it does come. So if you're facing a Karen in your life, someone trying to control what they don't understand, remember, you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you just have to let the storm roll in. And trust that nature and truth will speak for themselves.